My name is Dahlia Reed. I am 43 years old. For the 5 years I was with Samuel, I was always perfectly clear about the architecture of our relationship. From the very beginning, I told him I needed my own space, my independence. Some women might see that as a negotiation. For me, it was a non-negotiable term of surrender. His surrender, not mine. So we had the arrangement. A beautiful, quiet house in a leafy Chicago suburb. That was ours. And a sleek, minimalist studio in the West Loop, overlooking the city's steel and glass heart. That was mine. It was my sanctuary, I'd explain. A place to decompress from the pressures of my job as a brand strategist. A place where I didn't have to perform. The truth, the one I never spoke aloud, was that it was a place to decompress from him. Samuel is a good man. That's the damning part. Everyone says so. He's 45, a curator of rare manuscripts at the university. He lives his life in the hushed, reverent quiet of ancient paper and fading ink. He is gentle, he is patient, he is predictable. His love was a weighted blanket in July, comforting, at first, then utterly suffocating. "How was your day, Dahlia?" he'd ask every evening, his eyes full of a soft, earnest light that made me want to scream. "Did the presentation go well? Can I get you anything?" His questions felt like tiny hooks, each one trying to tether me to a life I found profoundly bland. He didn't understand that after a 12-hour day of crafting desire for luxury brands, the last thing I wanted was to manage the emotional needs of a man who looked at me like a lost puppy. That's why the arrangement worked. For me, I'd spend a few nights a week at the studio, under the guise of work. He never questioned it. Samuel's passivity was both his most convenient and most infuriating trait. Then, I met Roman. It was at a gallery opening, a raw, industrial space smelling of wine and wet paint. I was there for work, networking, and then I saw him. He wasn't talking to the patrons. He was leaning against a brick wall, watching everyone. He was the artist, a sculptor. He wasn't handsome in the way Samuel was, with his neat, scholarly features. Roman was elemental. His hands were large, stained with what looked like rust and clay. His dark hair was untamed. And his eyes didn't just look at you, they strip-searched you. He approached me later, bypassing the polite chatter. He didn't ask what I did. He gestured at the crowd with his glass. "What do you think they're all so afraid of?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I was taken aback. "I don't know," I said. "Being irrelevant, I suppose." He smiled a slow, knowing smile. "No, they're afraid of the silence. When all this noise stops." He held my gaze. "What about you, Dahlia? What do you do when it's quiet?" No one had ever asked me a question like that. It felt dangerous. It felt thrilling. We talked for an hour. He spoke of shaping cold, hard metal into something that felt alive. He spoke of passion, not as an emotion, but as a force of nature. He made me feel like a woman who contained multitudes, not just a successful strategist who was tired of her boring life. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him without a flicker of hesitation. As I drove home that night, to the quiet house and the man waiting for me, I told myself a beautiful, necessary lie. It wasn't betrayal. It was respiration. I was finally breathing again. The first time I went to Roman's studio, it felt like stepping onto another planet. It was a cavernous loft in Pilsen, filled with half-finished metal sculptures that looked like fossilized beasts. The air was thick with the scent of ozone from a welding torch and the faint sweetness of whiskey. It was the antithesis of my life with Samuel. Our home was a place of order. Books alphabetized, spices arranged by cuisine, pillows chopped just so. Samuel's world was curated. Roman's world was forged. It was chaotic, loud, and brutally, viscerally real. I have a client meeting that ran late. I'd text Samuel, my fingers trembling slightly as Roman's hand traced the curve of my spine. "Don't wait up for me." The lies came easily, frighteningly so. Each one was a brick. I used to build a wall between my two lives, and with each brick, I felt more powerful, more myself. With Roman, there was a different kind of hunger. It wasn't just physical, though that part was a revelation. It was a hunger for intensity. He would work on a sculpture for hours, his body slick with sweat, muscles coiling as he hammered and bent steel to his will. Then he would turn to me with that same ferocious energy, and I felt not like an obligation, but a conquest. Our conversations were work, too, but not the draining kind. He'd challenge my ideas, call me out on my corporate jargon, and make me defend my view of the world. It was exhilarating. With Samuel, conversations were a gentle volley of pleasantries. With Roman, they were a sparring match. One night, after a particularly intense session, he pulled a small, velvet box from a drawer. "I feel like you're holding back," he said, his voice soft but direct, "like there's a part of you still living in that quiet, sterile world you go home to." Inside the box was a sleek, black vibrator. It was sculpted, elegant, a piece of art in itself. My mind flashed to a conversation with Samuel. Years ago. He'd shyly suggested we visit an adult store. I had scoffed. "Oh, Sam. I'm not some college girl. I don't need props. Our connection should be enough." The memory made my cheeks burn, with a strange mix of shame and excitement. I started to say to Roman. He just smiled. "I know." That night, he showed me a pleasure that was sharp, selfish, and utterly profound. It was a pleasure disconnected from affection or duty. It was for me and me alone. And it was addictive. I started taking risks. I brought the velvet box back to the studio apartment in the West Loop, hiding it away, a secret totem of my new life. A few weeks later, after a long weekend spent entirely with Roman, I drove home in a daze. I was exhausted, sated, and my mind was a chaotic swirl of plans and alibis. Samuel was out for the evening at a university function. I had the house to myself. I unpacked my weekend bag in a rush, my thoughts already on a marketing proposal due the next day. I pulled out my toiletries, my clothes, and the box. For a split second, I considered taking it back to the studio. But I was tired. So tired. I opened the bedside drawer on my side of the bed. My side. It was filled with silk sleep masks, earplugs, a half-read book on philosophy. I tucked the velvet box into the back, behind a stack of old journals. A small, foolish act of carelessness. A ticking bomb placed in the heart of my own home. The silence began on a Tuesday. It was subtle at first. I came home, and Samuel was in the kitchen reading, not looking up when I walked in. He'd already eaten. There was a plate covered in foil for me on the counter. No. "How was your day?" No gentle kiss on the cheek. Just quiet. "Long day?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. He turned a page in his book. The usual. At first, I felt a wave of relief. Finally, he was giving me the space I craved. He was learning. But the silence stretched. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. No coffee brewed for me. The next evening was the same. We moved around each other like ghosts, the air between us thick and heavy. He didn't argue, he didn't yell, he simply withdrew. He withdrew his attention, his affection, his presence. It was a punishment far more exquisite and cruel than any fight could ever be. A screaming match. I could handle. I could twist words, play the victim, turn his anger back on him. But how do you fight silence? I started to feel a crawling unease. I tried to convince myself it was about his work. Or maybe he was feeling unwell. "Is everything okay, Sam?" I asked one night as we sat in the living room, the television casting flickering shadows on his impassive face. He didn't look at me. "Everything's fine, Dahlia." His voice was flat, a stranger's voice. The small intimacies vanished. He started sleeping closer to the edge of the bed. He took his laundry to the basement in a separate basket. He stopped leaving notes on the counter. Each erased gesture was a fresh wound. The house, once my refuge from the world, became a pressure cooker. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. The tick of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a countdown. Every creak of the floorboards was a judgment. My escapes to Roman became more frantic, more desperate, but even there, the silence followed me. I'd be in his arms, and my mind would be back in that quiet house, wondering what Samuel was doing, what he was thinking. His silence was a mirror, and in it, for the first time, I began to see a faint, terrifying outline of myself. I told myself he was being passive-aggressive, manipulative, that he was the one creating this drama. But a part of me, a small, cold part, knew better. This wasn't passive. It was precise, it was controlled, and it was working. I was starting to unravel. After 2 weeks of living in a waking purgatory, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed the explosion, the confrontation, the release. I found him in his study, meticulously cataloging a new collection of leather-bound books. The air smelled of old paper and lemon polish. He didn't look up when I entered. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharp, brittle. He placed a book gently on the shelf, his movements calm and deliberate. Then he turned to face me. The soft, earnest light in his eyes was gone. In its place was something I had never seen before. Not anger, not sadness. It was clarity. A cold, hard, diamond clarity. "I know you have your story prepared, Dahlia," he said, his voice even. "The one where I've invaded your privacy, the one where I'm the villain for looking in your drawer. I've played it out in my head. You're very good at that." My mouth went dry. My pre-rehearsed indignation, my defensive fury, it all evaporated. "What?" I stammered. "What are you talking about?" He walked to his desk and picked up a small, black object. He held it in his open palm. The vibrator. It looked obscene in the gentle, academic light of his study. "I was looking for a stamp," he said, his tone conversational. "Your drawer was slightly ajar. I saw the velvet box. I thought, maybe it was a gift you'd forgotten about." He gave a short, mirthless laugh. "I suppose, in a way, it was." I braced myself for the storm. For the tears, the shouting, the accusations. It never came. "I'm not angry," he said, placing the object back on his desk as if it were a curious paperweight. "I was, for a day. Maybe 2. But then I realized something." He looked directly at me, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt truly seen by him. And I was terrified. "All this time," he continued, his voice a quiet murmur, "I thought I wasn't enough for you, not exciting enough, not passionate enough. I kept trying to find the right key to unlock the part of you that you kept hidden away." He shook his head slowly. "But the door was never locked, was it? You were just in a different house entirely." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "So, no, I'm not angry, I'm just clear now." His calmness was 1,000 times more devastating than rage. He had taken my drama and refused to play his part. He had looked at my betrayal, analyzed it, and filed it away as a solved problem. He had already moved on, emotionally, while I was still standing in the wreckage. I fled. I drove to Roman's studio, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I needed his fire. I needed his validation. I needed him to tell me I had done the right thing. I burst in and told him everything, the words tumbling out of me in a frantic, jumbled mess. When I was finished, panting and wild-eyed, he just stared at me. "Good," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. He pulled me towards him. "So it's over. You can finally leave him. You can move in here. Be with me." His words weren't a comfort. They were a cage. He hadn't heard my pain or my confusion. He'd only heard an obstacle being removed. The terrifying realization dawned on me. I hadn't been running to Roman. I had just been running from Samuel. The unraveling was swift and brutal. Samuel operated with the detached efficiency of a surgeon excising a tumor. There were no pleading phone calls, no dramatic scenes. There was just an email. From his lawyer. Attached were spreadsheets, division of assets, proposed timelines, logistics. He was dismantling our 5-year life together, as if it were a flat-pack piece of furniture with instructions. I tried to call him, to force the emotional confrontation I now desperately needed. He didn't answer. He replied with a text. "Please direct all communication through my attorney. It's cleaner this way." Cleaner. That's what I had become to him. A mess to be tidied up. Meanwhile, my escape route was turning into its own kind of prison. Now that I was his, Roman's passionate nature began to curdle. The artist's intensity became an owner's possessiveness. "Where were you?" "I called an hour ago." "Why do you still need that studio apartment? You can work from here." "Who was that client you had dinner with?" The questions were different, but the need behind them was the same. He, too, wanted to tether me. The wild, untamable force I had been drawn to was now trying to build a fence around me. The freedom he had represented was an illusion, only visible from the outside of a cage I was already in. The end came during a stupid, ugly fight about me needing to spend a night at my studio to meet a deadline. "I don't get it," he yelled, throwing a paint-stained rag across the room. "You're free of him. Why are you still keeping me at a distance? I gave you everything he couldn't." And in that moment, the last of my self-delusion shattered. The ugly, selfish truth rose up in me like bile. "You didn't give me anything," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You were just a convenient exit." His face went slack with shock, then hardened into contempt. "I wasn't choosing you, Roman," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I was just running." I walked out of his loft that night and didn't look back. In the space of a month, I had lost them both. I drove to my studio, my sanctuary, my independent space. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The silence that greeted me was no longer a choice. It was a sentence. The final meeting was at the lawyer's office. A sterile, impersonal room with a large mahogany table that felt like a coffin. Samuel was already there. He looked good. He wore a crisp blue shirt, and the tired lines around his eyes seemed to have faded. He looked lighter, as if he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying for a very long time. A burden that was me. We signed the papers in silence. The only sound was the scratching of pens and the rustle of legal documents. It was the most civilized, heartbreakingly brutal end to a 5-year relationship I could imagine. As we stood to leave, he looked at me. Not with hatred, not with love, with a sort of distant, clinical pity. "I hope you found the space you were looking for, Dahlia," he said, his voice even. Then he turned and walked away. Now, I have it. All the space I ever wanted. I am sitting in my studio apartment. My beautiful, minimalist kingdom. Everything is in its place. The view of the Chicago skyline is breathtaking. There are no needy questions, no suffocating affection, no one asking me where I've been, or how my day was, no one at all. I am free. That's what I tell myself. But the silence in this room is different. It's not peaceful. It's not a punishment from someone else. It's the sound of a vacuum. The sound of a life hollowed out by its own design. I fought so hard for a room of my own, and I finally have it. It's just that I never realized the door would lock from the inside. Sometimes, late at night, when the city lights glitter like cold, distant stars, a thought creeps in. A terrifying, serpent-like thought that coils around my heart. What if the problem was never the cage? What if the problem was the thing rattling around inside it? What if the silence wasn't the punishment I had to endure, but the destination I was running toward all along? I have all the space in the world now, and I have never, ever felt so trapped.